What's going on, everybody? My name is Paul, and I'm currently a program manager working in the tech field. I've currently been working in tech for a little over 10 years now, and through that time, I've had the opportunity to work at a lot of great jobs, and in order to get those jobs, I've had to go through a lot of different interviews. So I totally understand how interviews can be frustrating, overly complicated, and super confusing. So today, we're going to break down the process of going through an interview and how you can ace your next interview as well. Applying for jobs and going through the application process can be an incredibly stressful experience, especially if you just gotten fired, maybe you got laid off, or maybe you're in the midst of an extended period of time where you've been unemployed. You might be asking yourself why you're hearing crickets after you've applied to dozens of jobs. An interview that you thought went really well, and you hear nothing back. Super frustrating. Maybe you went through a couple rounds of interviews and you didn't get an offer. What happened? So let's take a step back and we'll dive into what the interview process really looks like. I want to start off this video by saying that a lot of the tips and tricks and the experience that I personally come from a white-collar background. You know, your typical office 9-to-5 kind of job. That's not to say the stuff that we're going to talk about can't be applied to other types of interviews or jobs, but just something to keep in mind as we go through the video. So you just applied to a job. Now what? The first step is probably going to be what's called a screener interview. This is really the very beginning of the interview where someone will give you a call, maybe someone from HR or the recruiter, to really understand why you applied to the job and to make sure that you're a good fit. With how easy it is to apply to jobs nowadays on places like LinkedIn, Monster, Indeed, it's really easy for anybody to apply to any job. Maybe this is someone straight out of college applying to a CEO position. You never know. So the whole point of the screener is to make sure that you're the right fit and to see if you're going to be a candidate for at least the short to medium list of interviewees. When going to the screener interview, make sure that you're able to speak to why you want the job and what makes you a good candidate. It's not uncommon to get questions such as, what made you interested in applying for this role? Why are you interested in leaving your current position? Why do you believe you're a good fit for this role? Here are some talking points that you can use to help answer some of those questions. When asked why you're interested in applying for the role, you might be interested because this is an opportunity that helps you further your career progression. Maybe this is something that you've always been interested in and you finally feel like you have the ability and the knowledge to accomplish whatever the next level might be. Remember, if you're talking about your current position or your current role, it's always a good idea to make sure that you're not talking badly about your company. Nobody wants to hear in an interview how much you hate your boss, your manager, or how you're underappreciated. This just puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, so really stick to the positives and try to frame everything in more of a positive light. When you talk about why you might be a good fit for the role, think about some of your strongest traits. Are you a super hard worker? Are you someone who's really good at problem solving? Are you someone who's super curious that's always going to look for the right answer or the different options or the different paths that someone can take? Now, these are a couple really generic talking points, so you really have to think about what's true about you. Don't just copy and paste an answer that you found on Google or YouTube or this video or whatever. Make sure that you're really thinking about who you are as a person and make sure that you bring that to your interview answers. It's really important that you make a good first impression with this interview. Remember, the recruiter or the HR person that you're talking to, they can be a huge advocate for you when it comes to the later rounds in the interview or even the final decision when it comes to hiring. A lot of the initial work that you need to do comes before the interview actually starts. So here are a couple things and tips to keep in mind. 1. Make sure you do research on the company before the interview. If you don't know how to pronounce the company's name or what they do, that's going to be a huge strike against you. I doubt you'll even make it past the screener at this point. 2. Make sure you know what the position is. Even if this is a stretch position, meaning this might be a promotion for you in terms of career growth, you should still be able to speak to what the position is, the general roles and responsibilities of it, and how previous experience will make you a good fit for that. 3. This isn't really something that you need to do, but something to keep in mind. Just because you don't meet 100% of the criteria doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get disqualified. Nobody should meet 100% of the job qualifications unless you're a doctor or something that requires a lot of extensive background. When it comes to applying, remember that you also need to have room to grow. So even if you only meet 50, 60, or 70% of the criteria, but you think you're a good fit, you should still apply to that job. 4. You want to dress to impress. That doesn't mean you have to go in wearing a tuxedo or something really gaudy, but just keep in mind that you want to make a good first impression. Take a look to see what the average person is wearing at the company, or you can even take a look at their social media, their website to see how people are generally dressed in the office. My rule of thumb is you should try to dress a little better than what the average person is wearing. So that means that people are going in jeans and a t-shirt or jeans and a polo, might not be a bad idea to put on some slacks and a nice button down like you see behind me. If it's a job that's more of like a banker position or something a bit more official, it's not a bad idea to put on a suit and tie with a nice pair of dress shoes as well. This isn't a fashion YouTube channel, so I'm not saying you have to go dressed in like you're about to interview for The Devil Wears Prada or that you're going to the Paris Fashion Week, but it's not a bad idea to make sure that you're still dressed to impress. You don't want to go in with stained clothing or wrinkles or anything that makes you look like a slob. Remember, first impressions do mean a lot. Alright, so you've applied for the job, you got your outfit picked out, and you've done your research. What next? Well, there's a couple additional things that you should do to prepare for the screener interview, which will only help as you continue to go to additional interviews after that. Make sure that you're practicing some of the answers beforehand, and then make sure that you have appropriate examples that you can pull from. 6. This happens once the interview is done, but don't forget to send a thank you notice. Even if it's just a quick email or a chat or a LinkedIn message or whatever the case might be, it's a great idea to always say thank you for your time, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you, or whatever else you might want to say. The one question that comes up a lot in these screener interviews is what I like to refer to as the money question. People might ask you something like, what do you currently make? What are your salary requirements for this position? Do you have a salary range in mind? In some states, like here in New Jersey, it's actually illegal for the company to ask about your salary history. But that doesn't mean it's illegal for you to bring it up in an interview or for the company to find some other discreet way or maybe a convoluted way to bring up the topic. This doesn't mean that the topic of salary will not come up at all, so you have to make sure that you're ready to talk about it. Here are a couple things to keep in mind when answering this question. Make sure that you have a general sense of what the proper market value is for the role. Make sure to factor in things like your experience, any certifications, skills, the location of the job, etc. As an example, a software engineer can start anywhere from $75,000 all the way to $200,000, $300,000, depending on all these factors. You can also flip the question back to the person asking. You can say something like, "That's a great question. What's the range that's being budgeted for this role?" Every company has an approximate range in mind when creating a job description, and the company may not want to show their hand first, but it only benefits them to be upfront about this if they're interested in hiring you. They may also deflect an answer with something vague like, "It really depends on the candidate's experience." If they say something like this, my personal strategy is to make sure that I stay strong in the negotiation because you don't want to give up leverage. If you share your salary history or you show your hand first, it gives the company a better sense of where you're at and what you're looking for, and they can tailor their expectations accordingly. Now, I know this might be really difficult, especially if you're relatively junior or you don't have a ton of experience in the field, because you have even less leverage at that point, but you can always answer with something like this. I'm interested in finding a position that's a good match for my skills and where I feel like I can truly connect with the team and the work. It's important to me that this opportunity has career growth potential and that there are a lot of other factors that I would love to consider. I'm confident that you're offering a competitive and fair market value salary, so maybe we can revisit this conversation at a later time. If you're a bit more of a veteran and you have a lot of experience in this field, you should have a really clear idea of what you're looking for, and you can take a bit of a more direct approach. You can say something like this: "The ideal role for me would have a salary range between $100,000 and $130,000 with included benefits like 3 weeks paid time off and equity, although I'm open to discussing this further based on the full compensation package. Is this within the approximate range budgeted for this position?" Now, this is only the screener interview, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and talk too much about total compensation or a job offer at this point, but keep in mind that you want the company to make sure that they're the ones making the offer first. At the end of the day, this is a really important question because this has a direct impact on your overall compensation if you do get the job at the end of it. As tricky as this question might be, by bringing it up early, there are benefits because you want to make sure that you're not wasting your time or the company's time if those expectations are not aligned. Also, as a final piece of advice, when it comes to the screener interview, don't be afraid to ask questions. Remember, you're learning about the company just as much as they are learning about you. So when you speak with the HR person or the recruiter or whoever's leading the screener interview, make sure that you have a couple questions or things that you might want to learn more about to make sure that this is the right fit. All right, cool. So you crushed your screener interview, and now they're asking you to come in for an in-person interview. This interview might be with your manager or someone else that you might work really closely with if you were to get hired for this position. The purpose of this interview is to assess your skills, make sure that you're a good potential fit, and to get to know you at a more personal level. Up until now, you've only been a name on a resume and maybe a couple notes that the person that you spoke with during your screener jot down about you. This is your opportunity to bring your personality to the table and to show them why they should hire you. This interview you can expect to be anywhere from 60 to potentially 90 minutes, and here are some of the most common questions that are asked. Tell me a bit about yourself. Could you walk me through your resume and tell me about the roles that you previously had? What are your career accomplishments and challenges? What are some of your strengths and weaknesses? Tell me about a time where you had a challenge or conflict at work. How did you deal with it? Tell me about a time where you made a mistake at work. How did you manage it? Tell me about a time where you demonstrated leadership. Is there anything else that you want to share with me today? There are hundreds, if not thousands, of variations of these questions, so you have to make sure that you're able to think on your feet and provide an answer regardless of how they frame it. What's most important is not how you answer or the fact that you even give a perfect answer, but it's to show them how you think, how you process information, and how you handle potentially stressful situations. So, how do you do all those things? Well, I'll give you one acronym, and that acronym is STAR. STAR stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. The STAR method is commonly provided as the number one way of answering questions during an interview, and there's a reason why. The STAR method allows you to provide a lot of background, a lot of context, without making your answer too long. Here's an example of how STAR works. STAR works by initially setting up the situation. So what's happening? What's going on in the company? What's going on in this particular story? Next comes a task. As a result of that situation, what's the task that you or your team or whoever you're telling the story about needs to complete? In the example that you provide, it should really be about you. You want to make sure that you're highlighting your abilities and not somebody else's. Next comes action. So as a result of that task, what's the action that you took? What did you do? What are the specifics? Can you provide some examples, some numbers, some quantitative or qualitative data, some milestones, dates? Who did you work with? Keep all that information in the back of your mind and try to fit as much of that in as makes sense. And then lastly, result. So what was the result? What ended up happening? Were people happy? Did you succeed? Did you fail? You need to be able to have a happy ending to your example that you're providing. Here's a really generalized example of how the STAR methodology might work. So during my last job, we were working with a huge client on a really tight deadline. Last minute, because of some changes on their end, they reached out and asked if we can provide the final deliverable a month ahead of schedule. As a result, we had to pull the team together and we had to figure out how we can make this happen. As one of the project managers on the project, I was able to take a look at the project timeline and identify a couple areas where I thought we can maybe shave some time. I got with the team, we made some calculations, and we were able to align in a way that made everyone feel comfortable how we would shave down those 4 weeks. As a result, we had to shave some of the scope out of the project, but we were still able to meet their expedited timeline per the request. As a follow-up, we actually were able to complete the remainder of the work that we originally wanted to do, and the client was super happy. I always make sure to have a couple different stories and situations that I can use when it comes to answering any type of interview question. It's really good to have a couple of examples. You don't want all positive examples or all negative examples. It's a good idea to mix in a bit of both, so that regardless of the type of question, you have a really good example that you can turn to. When it comes to preparing these examples, make sure you're able to really think about some of the details that are going to be important to the answer. Things like numbers, dates, who you worked with. These are all critical to include when you provide your examples. The more detail that you're able to include in your answer, the stronger your answer feels, and the more impactful that answer might have to the person asking the questions. But you need to make sure that as you're providing those, you're only providing the most core pieces of information. You don't want your answer to drag, and you have to keep in mind that most interviews may only be a few minutes, especially if you're meeting with multiple people, so you want to be respectful of their time as well. For a lot of jobs, this might be where the interview process ends. After this interview, you might either find out if you got the job or if you didn't. But for a lot of other jobs out there are additional steps. These additional steps might mean coming into the office for another round of in-person interviews, maybe with the same people, maybe with a different group of people, or it can look like one of these types of examples. Sometimes, for more specialized jobs like coding or design, they might ask you to come in to take some type of test or to complete a mini assignment. And the primary reason behind this is to assess your skills. This allows the team to get a sense of your abilities and to see firsthand what you can do. Another way can be some type of meal or a social outing. This may take the form of a more casual meal like a lunch. It helps provide a more relaxed atmosphere for you to speak with somebody from the company and for them to speak with you. But remember, this is still an interview, so don't let your guard down and make sure that you keep everything that we talked about top of mind. Personally, when I was going through the interview process for the job I'm at right now, it was an all day long process. In the middle of it, I got about an hour or so for lunch, and during that lunch, they paired me with someone who worked at the company, and we just sat down at the cafeteria and chat together. Even though they didn't ask me any interview questions necessarily, it was definitely part of the interview process. The person that I was having lunch with was able to get to know a bit about me, to see from a team chemistry perspective if I would fit in with the team, and obviously we did talk about some work things, which I'm sure they relayed as a part of the final interview assessment. So, the interview process might be over. What do you do next? Well, there's a couple things that you can do with the recruiter to make sure that you're setting the proper expectations and timelines. Some common questions that I like to make sure that I understand are the following. When do you expect the interview process will be wrapped up for this position? Are there any additional steps in this interview process that I should be aware of, or anything else that I can provide? And lastly, make sure you give a big thank you to the person that helped coordinate this, because it did take a lot of their time. If it's appropriate, you could send a small gift, whether it's a box of donuts, some cookies, some flowers, a letter, whatever the case might be, but make sure you use your best judgment, because in a lot of places, that might actually not be acceptable. If you are selected for the job, you can expect the following things to happen. Firstly, you'll receive the job offer. This is the official letter from the company or an email that details out your salary, your total compensation, any additional information such as bonuses, along with critical information about your employment itself. This is the point at which you need to determine if you want to make a counteroffer. This is where a lot of that previous research that you did is going to be super important. As an example, if your expected salary range was somewhere in the $70,000 to $75,000 range, but the offer only came in at $50,000, this is something you might want to discuss with your recruiter. You also need to understand the details of accepting this position. Are there any restrictions on that start date? Is there an NDA that you have to sign? Make sure that you're reading everything in full detail. Once you accept the job offer, the company might actually run a background check as a final requirement before officially accepting you. This is why it's super important that you don't lie on any part of the application process. If there's anything that you're trying to hide, it'll most likely come up at this point, and you'll have wasted a lot of time both for yourself and the company. Once you've accepted the job offer and you've passed the background check, what do you do if you're currently employed? Depending on your region and the type of job that you're in, this might vary, but generally speaking here in the US, it's customary to offer at least a 2-week notice. Depending on your job, you might have a specified notice period, which means you might have to offer even a lengthier period than the 2 weeks, but that's something hopefully you're already aware of and something you factored in when it comes to accepting the job and the timeline that you provided to the new company. When it comes to interviewing, make sure that you're keeping it genuine and make sure that you're keeping it real. At the end of the day, these are people that you're spending minimum 40 hours with, so you don't want to lie to get to the position only to have to deal with that for the rest of your career there. At the end of the day, I know it might feel like it's a rush to get a job, but I'd rather take a longer period of time to make sure that I get the right job than rush to get the job that isn't the right fit, because it'll only make you more miserable. As much as you're applying for the job, you're also interviewing the company to make sure that you're both mutually a good fit. At the end of the day, when you accept the job, you want to make sure that it feels like a win-win and not like one side is getting a better deal than the other. If you're relatively junior in your career, or this is one of your first interviews, it's totally normal and okay to feel nervous. For someone new to interviewing, this might seem like a ton of new information, but trust me, it does get better. And the more you interview and the more you prepare, it'll begin to feel more and more natural. Keep in mind that most people don't succeed in their first interview. It takes 2, 3, 4, a dozen, 20, lots of interviews to find the perfect job. So don't get discouraged if the first couple of interviews don't go exactly as you planned. I'll be honest, the first couple interviews that I personally went to straight out of college, the interviewer actually stopped the interview and told me right then and there, I don't think you're a good fit for this role. So it took me a lot of failure to get to the point that I'm at now, but like I said, it does get better. So no matter how badly the interview goes, there's always another shot, I promise. So hopefully with some of these tips and tricks, you're able to crush your next interview as well. This is a ton of information, so feel free to save and rewatch this video as many times as you need. And with that said, best of luck on your next interview. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.